Great. Well, it looks like we've got a good amount of people logged on here, so we can go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maya Swope. I am the Outreach and Volunteer Coordinator here at Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness. We're very excited to have you all here this afternoon and excited to have some great authors and illustrators of some really fun Boundary Waters and Northwoods themed books here today. For anyone who is not familiar, Friends of the Boundary Waters is a nonprofit that has been working to protect the Boundary Waters and the surrounding ecosystem for over 40 years. And we really continue that work today because of all of you, with all of your help, and recognizing that people, wilderness, and community are all kind of intersecting and all together, really important to energizing people to visit the Boundary Waters, and then also important to protecting the wilderness. So kind of fitting into all of that, we thought it would be great to celebrate some of the kind of craft that comes out of the Boundary Waters. And in this case, it is children's books. If anyone is looking for holiday presents or just wanting to inspire kids in your life to think about the Boundary Waters during a wintry time when maybe folks aren't visiting as much, I think this will be a great session to kind of think about some of that and to just highlight some of the different work of folks that have been involved in this. So we do have a few different folks here today to talk about their books, and we will kind of just go through all of them. They'll share a portion of their book, and then at the end we'll have time for question and answers. And I will also send out a link at the end that will have information on how you can buy the books and where you can find more information about that. Just a few notes about the Zoom call here today. We do have a question and answer tab at the bottom. So if anyone has questions throughout or at the end, please feel free to add those into the Q&A tab, and we'll get to those towards the end of the presentation here. And then there's a chat function. If anyone has kind of additional comments throughout or is having technical or other difficulties, we can use the chat button for that. So I guess I will start the screen share here, and I'll turn it over to Wes, who is the author of kind of the first book that we will share. Let's see. So Wes, it is all you.
Yeah, thank you, Maya. My name is Wes Erwin, and I wrote the book Boundary Waters ABC. The illustrator is Kathy Kemp, who I just admire so much. She was so easy to work with and just really did a nice job, I think, on the illustrations. I've been going to the Boundary Waters. I was trying to think about that for around 30 years, plus or minus. Camping and canoeing and enjoying the outdoors. And then what kind of inspired me to write a children's book about the Boundary Waters is I became a stay-at-home dad in 2009. And at that time I had 2 preschool kids, and I needed a creative outlet, I think, was part of it. But every week we'd go to the library and I'd bring a big Duluth pack. And in my book, D is for Duluth pack, so that made it in the book. And we'd stuff that Duluth pack full of books, and we'd come home with a fully loaded Duluth pack that I probably wouldn't want to take on a portage trail. And we'd go home and we'd read books, and so we read many books. But I didn't find a lot of books about the Boundary Waters of the Northwoods. There were some exceptions, and Polly has some good books on that topic, and there's some other ones as well. But I thought this was maybe an area that was missing. So I sat down and during nap times for the kids and on Saturdays and tried to put together some thoughts and a story. So what it ended up being was Boundary Waters ABC. A couple of other things. I do have another book that's about the Boundary Waters area. I'm not sure it'll have Boundary Waters in the title, but that's in the works with Legacy Publishers out of Ely. And so I'm excited about that. We don't have a publication date yet, so I'll put that up on my website when that becomes available. So I'm looking forward to that as well. let's see. I guess I'll share some of the book with you. And this is my illustration for M is for Moose. And I thought Kathy did a wonderful job with the illustration of the moose. You can tell that he's recently been eating water, underwater, stuck his head underwater, and enjoying the vegetation there. So this is M is for Moose. Keeping my eyes on the unsuspecting moose, we paddle our canoe silently at a snail's pace. Nearby, the moose plunges its head underwater and chomps vegetation growing on the bottom of the lake. The water splashes and drips as it lifts its head from the lake. We watch the moose dine for minutes before it spies us, turns slowly toward shore, and ambles off into the woods. Often when I share this book with kids in elementary schools and kindergarten centers and preschools, the moose is one of their favorite illustrations, and they really enjoy hearing about the moose. And often what I do is I tell them about how big the moose is. I'm a very tall person myself, and so I talk about how tall the moose would be. And if you have antlers like this moose does, you know, the antlers might, you know, break the ceiling in their classroom if they're standing there in front of the kids, and how they drink or how they eat by putting their heads underwater. And the kids really, I think, are interested and excited to learn about this majestic animal. So that's kind of a fun thing to do. Let's see, my second one is A for Aurora Borealis. It is beautiful and clear night in the Boundary Waters. I carefully pick my way through the dark, away from the dying campfire, and lie flat on my back on a rock overlooking the calm lake. Overhead, I see shimmering red, green, yellow, and white lights dancing in the northern sky. It's a brilliant laser light show put on by Mother Nature. I watch with wonder and amazement as these lights flash and glow. So most of these, you know, kind of little stories that go along with the ABC book are experiences that I've had in the Boundary Waters, and you know, something that I think a lot of people who have gone to the Boundary Waters can relate to. The skies are dark, you know, it's completely different than when you live in a city and you walk outside and you can barely see any stars. I mean, everything is just so amazing there. So so that's part of what I was trying to capture in this one. And this illustration, again, a lovely illustration, I think, thanks to Kathy, is Q is for quiet. I wake up as the sun is just beginning to climb over the eastern horizon. I leave the warmth of my sleeping bag and sit on a rock with a view of the calm lake. The only sound is the lonesome call of a loon across the lake. As the echo of the loon's cry fades away, I hear a white-throated sparrow sing its distinct song, Old Sam Peabody, Peabody, Peabody. Then all is quiet again. The quiet moments such as these are what make spending time in the Boundary Waters so special. And again, my book is an ABC book, so there's 26 different illustrations, obviously, and 26 different stories. If anyone's interested, I do have books that I can sell, you know, from myself. You can go to my website, weserwin.com. It is going out of print, or has gone out of print, so there's a limited number, I think, at Barnes & Noble. The last I checked, you could get some at the Roseville and I think Burnsville Barnes & Nobles. And I think it's also still on Amazon. So
Great. Well, thanks, Wes, so much for sharing all of that. And for anyone that is interested in learning more about the book or potentially purchasing it, I will send out a follow-up email, as I mentioned, that has the link and a way to contact Wes. So next, I want to introduce Polly Carlson-Voiles, who is based in Ely and is a prolific children's book writer of lots of different things related to the Boundary Waters and the Northwoods. And she's here to share a couple of different of her books for different ages. So Polly, if you would like to unmute and tell us a little bit about kind of some of the books here today.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Polly Carlson-Voiles. I've been inspired by the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness since I was 15, although it was then called Quetico Superior. A city girl, not knowing what I was getting into, I signed up to go to Camp Widgewagon. And honestly, people say this all the time, but it was absolutely true for me. It changed me. So setting foot in the BWCA, paddling for days, listening to the silence of wilderness, rough waters, work and laughter with friends, watching storms heave over the horizon, seeing stars as you only see them in areas where there's no ambient light, all helped change my path in life, really. So after teaching, I began to write. I didn't write until I wrote during the whole time that I was teaching, but when I retired in 2001, I decided I better get all those books together and do something with them. My husband and I were also fortunate to spend our summers at Lake Vermilion and with our kids. But when we retired to a house right next to the Boundary Waters on Moose Lake. And we've been there for 14 years. Just recently, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we moved into a house on the other side of Ely, still in the woods, but in a slightly different kind of environment. So I'm just going to talk about the books sort of one at a time. My first one, published by Raven Productions in Ely, Johnny Hyde published it. It's a picture book for ages 4 to 8. And it was inspired by my winter camping experiences and skiing that we did near our cabin. All those tracks running around in the woods just intrigued me. And so I began to research how animals survive and thrive in winter and started throwing drawings together and so forth. After my teaching days at school, I'd come home and go to my studio and mess around with cut paper, making these drawings. So it was the frogs that freeze, their hearts stopping until spring, and the quality of the snow that helps insulate hiding active voles in subnivean tunnels, and the astounding miracle of black bear cubs being born in January, weighing just 8 ounces and barely covered with fine hair. All of these amazing facts sort of I saw as being tied together into a web of survival that could be sort of represented by a story where tracks go through the woods and you don't know who the tracks belong to, but you see each of these animals in their state of adaptation, whatever it happens to be. Some of them are out and about and some of them are not. And so that was what I was focusing on. So Eat, Sleep and Howl is the next one. And you want to do the cover of that one, maybe? Okay, there. And this is a board book. Like Jenny mentioned, board books. This is one that kids can chew on and stuff like that, have in bed with them, but it is repurposed art from Someone Walks By. Now you could go to the next one, Maya. Yeah. So this is an example of what's inside here. I reduced the words and changed, close-ups, some on some of the illustrations and so forth to make just each animal pop out a little bit. So the third one is the third book that I am presenting today is Summer of the Wolves, a book I wrote, I guess I did mention to the other authors today, I worked on for 27 years. And after I moved up to Ely, I thought, okay, one more, I'd submitted it before, it had had done okay, you know, gotten nice rejections, but I had then been a wolf pup nanny at the Wolf Center, and I decided, okay, I'm starting over. So I did, which is something you have to be able to do with a novel sometimes. So I started over. And the source of it, I'd gone to Rainy Lake as a young child and been fascinated by an island I stayed on there where two islands were linked together by a sand spit. And this island just lived in fantasy in my mind for years. And then when I'd worked with a lot of lost and found children in my special ed career. And so I decided to bring one of them into this, not an actual child, but sort of a composite of some kids that I'd worked with. And I sent her to northern Minnesota to have an uncle who was a wildlife biologist who studied wolves. And so in her first days there on this island, she goes with this uncle and they check radio collars and they find one of the wolves has been killed. And the uncle finds a pup that survived, that's very young, eyes haven't opened, hiding in the den. He pulls it out. And when Nika first touches this pup and tucks him under her shirt to keep him warm, everything begins to change for her. And though she doesn't know it for a long time, she begins to heal. A very important chapter in this book, her uncle takes her and her brother Randall on a canoe trip. And it's another important step on her journey to loving this new land, finding her new family, and becoming more comfortable in her own skin. This book also drew on my experience and fascination with wolves. I volunteered a couple of times with wolves, once with a captive wolf study in Forest Lake, Minnesota, and then twice as a wolf pup nanny at the Wolf Center. And that experience kind of cinched my final take and final draft that I wrote of this book. And it was shortly that draft was accepted the first time I sent it out, which is pretty nice after 27 years of writing on it. The cover of this book is worth mentioning because the wolf is a wolf that lived near us, near Moose Lake. She was a wild wolf, but she was collared. So the wolf study had followed her. So I knew where she was if I looked up on the wolf study that they used to post where wolves were. And we saw her from our house many times over a period of maybe 7 years or so. And then she died at 10 and a half, which in the wilderness is very old for a wolf. So she's always got a special place in my heart. Her name she was number 955 in the study. And when they picked the cover for this novel, they did not know that I knew this wolf. They had asked me for pictures and I sent a bunch and they picked her. That was just too much and wonderful. The last book just came out last January and it's called Big Yellow. And it also resulted from a Boundary Waters experience. It's written for ages 4 through 8, and it was illustrated by Concy Powell. She did wonderful, playful, but very realistically detailed illustrations for this book. She also lives in Ely and does wonderful books herself that are about this area. But this is another picture book inspired by experience. When camping in the Boundary Waters with my husband and friends, one day I was deep in the trees behind our campsite and I heard an unexpected roar above my head. And I looked up and the sky spaces between the tall red and white pines had turned yellow. And the spaces were filled with this gigantic plane with a 90-foot wingspan that was flying low and close to the tops of the trees. I immediately had decided to call this book I'd make a book about this plane. I just had to. My friends supported me. I started researched it, as you do for for a few years. And the more I learned about it, the more amazed I was by its capabilities of how it can land, how it can take off, and fly up very steeply from fires and all its just amazing capabilities. Well, this last summer, with all the fires in Ely, lo and behold, Big Yellow once again visited our area. And she has some cousins that look very much like her that do some of the same things, plus a lot of other firefighting aircraft that do incredible jobs in helping the firefighters. So for all of my books, yeah, there's another shot of Big Yellow rising up from the flames. And in the end, we have, this book has a wonderful section of back matter that talks about all the nitty gritty nuts and bolts of how this plane picks up the water, how, you know, how much it weighs when it's fully loaded and all of those things, a lot of stuff that really, and then there are links so that you can go and watch it in action. If you go on the internet, you can see it if kids are interested in following up in that way. So I would say that for all of my books, as a former educator and special educator, nothing is more important to me than kind of igniting a spark or blowing upon a spark of interest for our gorgeous, precious wilderness, hoping their interest will grow and expand and they'll help to protect this land and creatures for the future. So that's my little book bit. Thanks very much for listening.
Well, yeah, thank you so much, Polly, for sharing, and really a great variety of books there for kids with lots of different interests and different ages. So I appreciate all of that. And just a reminder to folks that we will have time for questions at the end. I saw a couple questions pop up during that, so I will address those in just a bit here. But next, I want to introduce Jenny Anderson, who is the author of 1, 2, 3 Ice Fishing, and also, she was saying, kind of a mom to young kids, and that was some of the inspiration behind this book. But I will let her talk a little bit more about that. So Jenny, I will turn it over to you.
Cool, thank you. Yes, I'm Jenny Anderson, and I am the author of 1, 2, 3 Ice Fishing. I'm at a cafe right now, so sorry about any background noise. But yes, I wrote 1, 2, 3 Ice Fishing sort of at the beginning of the pandemic it was just as ice fishing was ending. So I wanted to find a way to teach my son about ice fishing since the ice was starting to melt. There really was no way to actually get outdoors to show him in person like we had been in the winter. So I looked for a book, and there was nothing out there for kids on ice fishing, which of course is just such a big part of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Northwoods winter life. And I've gone ice fishing in the Boundary Waters many times. It's quite the experience bringing a hand dogger out and drilling some holes and, snowshoeing out into the middle of nowhere, hoping to find some fish. Thankfully with fish finders, if there's, trout or whatever down there when you're drilling holes. So yeah, we love ice fishing. And, as a mom as well, I think I want my son to know, hey, mom can teach you about ice fishing too. A lot of people have the assumption that dad is the one that teaches about the outdoors, but in our situation, mom is way more obsessed with ice fishing than dad is. So, but yeah, I'd love to just read a few of the pages. Actually, it's like a 12-page book, so I'm just going to read the whole thing because literally there's just a couple of words on every page. It's for ages 1 to 5. Like baby to 5, probably, kids who don't know about ice fishing or wintertime activities or some of the terminology and concepts of ice fishing. Okay, so 1 auger, 2 fishing rods. We are packing up the sled, and then you lift the flap up and you'll see there's a heater, fish finder, fishing rods, hot cocoa, some of the essentials of ice fishing. And my son loves pointing at, the Vexilar, the fish finder, and saying, hey, that's our fish finder. All right, 3 tip-ups, 4 shiny lures. I love the frozen lake, mom said. So tip-ups are pretty realistic. It's one of our favorite ways to catch walleye. And yeah, there's me. That's my version of me in bear form. 5 ice holes. 6 bluegills. So when you open the flap, it shows six very large bluegills. Those are some good sized ones. So if we ever catch ones that big, those are definitely keepers. Let's see what swims below. And these are pretty realistic images of fish. Oh, I forgot to mention this. My sister was the illustrator. So she is a super talented artist. She's in art school getting her master's right now. So she worked with me on making this book. And if you ever want to do business with your family, I highly not recommend it, but it was very flexible because I could text her in the middle of the night and get some information on, edits that she'd be able to make and that sort of thing. But there's a bass, perch, northern pike, walleye, bluegill, and crappie. My son, he knows that when we go out and bring up a fish, he'll say crappie or he'll say northern pike. And a lot of other parents have said the same thing. They'll go fishing and the kids can tell exactly what kind of fish that is because of the realistic images, or at least they have an idea of what sort of fish live in our Minnesota lakes. All right, 7 bass, 8 walleye. And when you open the flap, you'll see, the walleye grabs the minnow and then the flag goes up. So it's really interactive and very realistic with how tip-ups work. And some parents like to count all the fish just to make sure that I put the right amount of fish in there. The bite is far from slow. Clearly slow because that bucket is filled with many perch. 9 perch, 10 crappies. Ice fishing is so fun. Let's pull our lines and pack it up. Time for a fish fry, little one. And you can open the flap and it ends with some fish fry, which is basically our favorite meal to have when we're out ice fishing. Especially in the winter, we always fish to eat. In the summer, there's a lot of catch and release for us, but if we find some good sized crappies in the winter time, we love keeping it and showing our kids, this is food, this is sustenance, and we let go of the ones that are too small, we let go of the ones that are too big, but sometimes, we can enjoy some fish fry tacos. So this was such a fun book for me to share with my kids and with, other families who have been wanting to share ice fishing with their kids as well. A lot of happy grandparents and parents who grew up with ice fishing, finally getting a chance to share that with their kids. So I don't know. It's on 123icefishing.com. It's available at many of the smaller bookstores in Minnesota. And I guess, I'm really proud of the work that my sister did on this and to see her work published. I went the self-publishing route, which I think a lot of people don't do because they're not sure how to go about it. But for me, I didn't know how to go about getting it published by a publisher. So I was like, well, I'm just going to self-publish this because I have the means and the programs and I think the connections to do this. So that's what I did. I was at the St. Paul Ice Fishing Show this week talking to people about it and signing copies. And it's just been so fun to see it under people's Christmas trees and people talking about it now a year later since it's been published.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that. I love the fish illustrations. I think those are great. And Jenny was mentioning to us before we started here that she has a couple other books in the works. I think you said a 123 camping and a 123 fishing. So I'll let folks look out for those in the future as well.
Perfect.
Great. Well, we have made it to our last panelist of the afternoon here. I will introduce Chuck Dayton, who took some incredible loon photos and worked to kind of compile them into a book here, The Secrets of the Loon. And Chuck, I will turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about the process and about some of your inspiration for this book.
Sure. Well, I've spent a part or all of the last 67 summers in or next to the Boundary Waters. After a high school trip, my parents bought a place up there and we did a little outfitting, and I've been back every summer. And after I'm a recovering lawyer, and after I retired, part of my therapy for forgetting how to be a lawyer was photography. And I bought a kayak that I sit on top and I can pedal with my feet. So I have my hands free for photography. And I started photographing loons. We always have a loon family on our lake with 1 or 2 chicks, usually 1 or 2 chicks. A few years, none of them show up. So I started taking pictures, and I'd get up at dawn and go out when the mist was on the lake. And after a couple of years, I began to think, what am I going to do with all these pictures? And it occurred to me to try to do a picture children's book. So I put the book together with help from a wonderful local artist and illustrator who also is working with Polly, and I guess did the illustrations for Big Yellow, Concy Powell. And when I had a draft, I sent it to the Minnesota Historical Society. And they got back and said, well, we love your photographs, but our audience is like 3 to 6, 3 to 7, and your text is really about 4th grade. And maybe we can teach you how to write kiddie speak, but we have an author who has published 125 nature books for children. And would it be okay with you if we had her rewrite the text of the book? So her name is Laura Perdiz Salas, and she did a wonderful job of rewriting the text of the book, following pretty much the story, but and did it in verse, in beautiful verse. And then I had a wonderful publisher, Shannon Pennyfeather, who brought in a graphic designer who presented the pictures in the book, not like a scrapbook, but in a graphic way that made them appear part of the wild. So this is really the product of a team that worked together on it. I'm very happy to be able to read a part of the book. I'll kind of start in the middle of the book. The previous part of the book talks about the chick hatching and learning to swim and learning to fish. And so this is kind of the second half of the book. So summer wears sunshine or fog, soft and gray, and skips by so quickly while moon grows each day. Eventually, father's back runs out of space, so the chicks each tuck under a one-wing embrace. And that particular photo, by the way, is unusual. When the chicks get a little big to ride on the adult's back, they take a nap by sticking their head under the wings. It's kind of neat. Okay. Lake wrinkles and twinkles below shimmering skies, but danger flies over with sharp, hungry eyes. Mother's wild call, its rise and fall, warns moon of the eagle. Can moon survive? Her heavy bones whisper, moon, you can dive. Moon dives underwater. She glides fast and sleek, escapes the bald eagle's talons and beak. Cleaning and preening, moon masters each skill. She can catch her own dinner. She fills her own bill. Moon's learning loon music. Mama's wail soars, haunting, like the howl of the wolf, full of searching, of wanting. More lessons from mother. Flap, flap, moon, loon, try. But a loon's built for water. Leave the lake? Why? These rocky shores with trees tipped in gold, these ripples and currents, fishy and cold, this dazzling sky, a vivid blue dome, this spruce-scented bay offers comfort it's home. But early each morning, Loon flaps and fails. Her narrow wings slap like weary ship sails. Then one day she launches herself into sky. Her wing feathers murmur, Loon, you can fly. Wind whistles. Moon's wings, she is almost full grown. Soon her parents leave Moon and her brother all alone. The leaves flutter down, fall stamps them with frost. Moon knows why she's going. Moon knows she's not lost. She'll fly through the breeze to warm, salty seas. She'll stay 1, 2, 3 winters where the ocean won't freeze. Every secret Moon needs, she carries inside. And one late autumn morning, Moon spreads her wings wide. So that's the story. And then I wanted to get a lot of facts about loons into the book, and I tried to put them in my story in the beginning. It just didn't work. They're all alluded to in the text, but fortunately, they let me write a piece in the back of the book called Back Matter, where I provide a discussion of loon biology. And it talks about how the loons build a nest very close to the water because they can't walk on land at all. Their legs are behind them instead of underneath them, and they share sitting on the egg until it hatches, and then the little loon can swim almost immediately, and they learn how to swim and dive, but they often ride on the backs of the parents because they need to avoid snapping turtles or big fish that might want to eat them. They become great fishers. Loons can swim very fast underwater. And one thing I didn't know when I started writing this book is that when they swim underwater, they do a frog kick with their webbed feet instead of up and down like ducks do. And they can go very fast and they can turn very fast. And they have very sharp beaks and very supple necks. So they're champion fish catchers. I can stop there if you want. But I have a portion in there where I describe the different types of loon calls. And if you love the Boundary Waters, you know that they're not always the same. There are really 4 kinds. And there's a link in the back of the book where you can listen to them online. Just go to loon.org. But there's the long wail that everybody knows, which is really a call saying, I'm over here, where are you? And then there's the kind of a silly laugh that gave rise to the phrase, crazy as a loon. And that's called a tremolo. And that's basically saying, I'm here. And you often hear it when loons are in flight. And then there's a call called the yodel, which only the males make. And that's the only way you can tell males from females, because you certainly can't tell it by looking at them. We used to think that the males had a more prominent forehead, but that's been shown not to be true. And I'll imitate it. It goes, ooh, 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 ooh. And it's a warning call. It means, this is my lake, don't you dare come here. And the male sticks his neck out over in front of him, parallel to the surface of the water. And then finally, there's the hoot, where it's just very soft and you can't really hear it unless you're close. And that's the loons talking to each other, and that happens all the time. So that's enough from me, but it was really fun for me to do. And I've been enjoying it.
Great. Well, thank you, Chuck, for sharing that. And I love that it's kind of simple enough for young kids, but you were able to include some of that detail about the loons towards the end there. So as we get towards the end of our presentation, I'll just remind folks to put questions into that Q&A tab. I want to give a special shout out and thank you to all of the authors and illustrators who joined us today. And really, we're grateful that you're writing these great books about the Boundary Waters and about getting outside to, really connect the next generation to the Boundary Waters, to this incredible place. And then on a separate note, I just want to remind everyone who's listening here today that today is the last day to submit a comment to the Minnesota DNR on copper sulfide mining near the Boundary Waters. They've had a comment period open for the past couple weeks, and that deadline is today. So if anyone is interested, I will in a second here put a link to more information about that in the chat. But I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen and we can dive into some more of these questions. So I'm seeing a question from Scott here, and I will kind of direct this to anyone that wants to answer. If multiple people want to answer this, that is fine. Who asks, do you test out your work with actual children? How do you do that? So if anyone wants to get at how that process goes of making sure it's something that the kids are going to like.
I did that. I was volunteering at a daycare center and reading to kids, and so I read the early version of my book, and they cheered, and then I would run it by the children of friends. And get some feedback, and some of them weren't very interested in my text the first time around, actually.
Does anyone else have thoughts on how to answer that question?
My children, my two boys, they were the ones that I would tell these stories to. They were originally bedtime stories, and then eventually it grew into this book, and so that was my prime audience. I'm writing right now. I'm also writing some mid-grade novels, and so for those, I will have actual kids who are readers before I submit it to a publisher. But it's always a good idea to try it out on other kids, and in going to schools too. I think it's helpful to kind of get their ideas for different things. If I'm telling a story about the Boundary Waters, often I'll put it in one of my presentations when I'm bringing my book, and just kind of test out what do the kids think of that.
I was gonna say, I have my son. He was about, how old was he? He must have been like just around 1 year old when I wrote this. So he was sort of my test subject to gauge interest, and definitely the toughest critic of all. So I passed the test with him. So the other thing I did was I looked at all the children's books that we had in our bookshelf that I loved the most. The ones that my son really liked, the simplicity of the words, how the images were, and what brought him to love those pictures so much. So just going off of some of my favorite authors and the illustrators, and then with my son, testing it out with him, and then I tested it out with like grandparents basically, and they were great critics as well. So that was my method.
Yeah, I wanted to add that I ran, one of the children I ran it by was about 6 years old, a kid named Max, and Max's favorite picture was the picture of a loon chick shaking a fish, because loons, when they catch fish and the fish are still alive, they'll shake them. So the little ones have to learn to do that. That was Max's favorite picture, and it almost got taken out of the book in the editing process, but I said Max loves that picture, so it has to.
Yeah, I always love going to schools. I get so much from kids, whatever age. I've been the older kids with the novel, and then I've been to some kindergarten, first grades with the picture book, and I always learn from them. But I have also been in writers groups with other children's writers for many years, and I always recommend that to anybody who is starting to write books, is to find peers. It doesn't have to be many, but peers to share your work with and to bounce things off of and to give you ideas. it's really, and they'll be honest with you too, as kids will be.
That's great. Yeah, so many test subjects, so many ways to look at if it's going to work out. I'm seeing a few questions about kind of like the publishing process. I see someone that was asking you, I think this was directed towards Jenny, how did self-publishing work? And if you could just kind of talk about what you did there. And then for everyone else, you know, how did you find a publisher for your books? How does all that work? And any advice for a newer author?
Okay, yes. I've done some interviews on this. If you Google search Jenny Anderson, self-publishing 1, 2, 3 ice fishing, and I'm pretty sure there's some like more in-depth interviews out there. But so basically I, had the idea, I wrote it down in my iPhone, and then I edited it for several months. I talked to people who are professional writers, in the news industry and outdoor writing industry, to have them look at it for accuracy. I'm glad I did, because there were some things that I didn't, even though I love ice fishing, I didn't know every single facet of it. So got some things corrected. I looked for illustrators, people who were in art school that would be able to do it for a more affordable price for me, or who were looking for experience, and then ended up just using my sister, which was great. And then, sorry, just turn on the music. Okay. And then I laid it out in Photoshop. If you know a little bit of graphic design, you can definitely lay it all out yourself. I got, the pages, the idea of what I wanted, and my sister figured out. And page by page, we laid it all out, add the words, and then look for a printer. That was the most complex part, was finding someone who could print it for an affordable price, because I wasn't going to print 100,000 books. I'm just me solo doing this as a passion project. So like, I knew what my budget was, and overseas was definitely the most affordable option for me, going with printing like 3,000 copies the first time. So yeah, I found a place overseas that would do it. It was difficult because it's like, if I hand my money over to these people that I don't know overseas, how do I know that they're going to follow through with it, and all these things? But there's contracts in place and protections in place for that. So I found one that I liked. It went well. And this year I used the same printing company because I trusted them already. And then I launched a website, and I self-sold everything, because as soon as you sell, wholesale or Amazon, they all take a cut, and I wanted to be able to see how it goes by myself with my own marketing power. And the first year I sold out completely. This year I ordered way more copies than I probably should have, so I have many copies left still. But yeah, you can, if you have the creative ability to design things, and you like graphics, an artist, or can get connected with an artist, it's actually doable. And it took me about 7 months from beginning to end to get it published. So it speeds up the process, I think, when you don't have, the middleman. So that was one positive. If you have any more questions, feel free to, reach out.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And I would love to kind of hear from other folks who went other publishing routes, what your process was like, in just a minute or two, and yeah, kind of what that looked like for you. Polly, looks like you're about to say something.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend going to classes, going to workshops, if there are workshops that an editor is coming to talk at. I went to the Loft in Minneapolis, and I went to classes that were taught by people who published, and I just found as many places as I could to get really information about how publishing worked and how to do it. And it did take me quite a while. You're going to get a lot of rejections with any of the big publishers, but with Houghton Mifflin, when I published with them, I had met the editor at a workshop. She was talking to a group of maybe 100 people. And afterwards I got in line, went up, got her card, said something about the book, about Summer of the Wolves that I was writing. She said, "Oh, that would be interesting to me." And then I took her card and I taped it on my computer. And during that time, I had a lot of time before I really submitted it, maybe 5 or 6 years. And when I did finally get the draft that I wanted to submit, I sent it to her and she took it. And it was a miracle, but because I had sent it out a couple of other times and gotten rejections. But having met her like that, I think was probably valuable because I mentioned it in my letter. So that's one route, but I would definitely use as many resources as you can, other writers, teachers, workshops, whatever.
I had the good fortune to have spend a little time with Deborah Fraser, who lives in Nashville and who wrote On the Day You Were Born, which is a pretty well-known children's book. And she helped me in terms of presenting the book to the publisher. And one of the things she did was to make a little thumbnail picture book of the whole book to see how it lays out and submit that. And she also thought that the publisher would be as interested in my story as the story of the book, and how I had been an environmental lawyer that had worked on preserving the boundary waters. And I actually was one of the founders of the Friends, these many centuries ago.
I was going to weigh in and just say, I think there are pros and cons for doing the self-publishing versus traditional publishing. Self-publishing can be quicker, but you have different maybe challenges in terms of having to sell the books more on your own and promote it, and not having all of the perks that come along with the traditional publisher. The traditional publisher is challenging because there's so many people that are trying to publish books that you get a lot of rejections. So you really have to have tough skin and not take things personally, and persevere, I think, is my recommendation. The other thing I wanted to mention is that there's a professional organization called the Society for Children's Book Writers and Publishers, SCBWI. And there's, the national organization, but then there's the Minnesota, Iowa region. And that's a really good resource as well.
I wanted to ask Jenny, I'm pretty impressed that you sold out your first order of 3,000 copies. And how did you do the marketing?
I did it on social media. Power of social media, yes. Thankfully, I already had a little bit of a following on like Instagram and Facebook, and then I pitched myself to local news organizations as much as I could, and thankfully, like WCCO got back to me, and I was able to get on their morning, like one of their morning shows, and that was a big day for me. And then lots of Facebook ads, just targeting the right people on social media, and that pretty much did it. And then reaching out to the local bookstores for like the few hundred that I wanted to get out to the local stores. But yeah, now I think I have like when I started selling, I might have had like 15,000 followers. So I had an audience there already who were very interested in ice fishing. So that helped.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Wes said, SCBWI is a great organization, and they do publish a list of publishers and what they're looking for. So that sort of helps. You can never send something to a publisher about wolves or ice fishing or whatever if what they want is cooking. I mean, you really have to learn exactly what it is that they're looking for, and they do publish a really good list that way.
Just to make sure we have time for some of the other questions in here. This is kind of a more specific question for Polly, but someone was wondering what the suggested age level for Summer of the Wolves is.
Well, I think it's best age for really, really taking it in as a kid is like 4th, 5th grade. That's in schools. I've gone to 4th and 5th grade classes, and it's just been fantastic. But I've had older men in their 50s or 60s come up to me when I'm signing books and saying, this book shouldn't have an age on it. Anybody can read it. So that's nice to hear.
Those are younger men.
Younger men, yeah. But I do think younger than fourth grade, I mean, a really good reader, but it's 350 pages. There's a lot of stuff in it about wolves. So it's best to have kids when they're just right at the right point in their learning where they can really take that in.
Great. And I think I'll fit in kind of one last more specific question. Chuck, somebody is wondering if you've considered publishing a nonfiction book with your photographs, something that maybe getting some more Loon facts in there.
Actually, I am thinking about a book that would look closely at the things that you see in nature every day, and photograph them in an interesting way. I'm also fascinated recently by the literature about how trees talk to each other.
Mm.
And I'd like to find a way to weave that in.
Great, yeah. Well, I know a lot of these authors have lots of exciting things coming up. So as I mentioned before, we will also know a recording of this full session, as well as links to everyone's individual websites and places you can buy books and kind of learn more about that. So if you're interested in kind of buying those and don't want to look into the different websites, look out for an email from me probably this afternoon or tomorrow that will have all of those details. And we'll encourage folks to look into some of these for winter gifts, for whatever that might mean for you. I know my mom's a teacher. I might be trying to buy a few of these for her. So I really want to just thank all of our panelists. It was great to have you all on here and to learn a little bit more about your process and about your books. Really appreciate your work to connect people to the Northwoods. Thank you everybody for joining. Panelists, if you have any final departing words, I will give an opportunity for you all to say that.
I do. Friends of the Boundary Waters is an advocacy organization. So everybody who is online here, get involved and support the causes that they're working on. And there's one specific to loons, which is there is a bill coming up in the legislature that will ban lead shot and sinkers. And loon, they kill loons because loons eat that stuff to keep their gizzards working well, and they eat whole fish. And so support the work of the Boundary Waters, Friends of the Boundary.
Here, here.
Yeah, I think of that every time I go to the Boundary Waters and we filter water to drink. Water is so important, and it would be really sad to not be able to drink the water there. So I do appreciate the work of the Friends of the Boundary Waters as well.
Very much so, and thank you for reaching out, Maya, and including children as part of the audience. I think it's a really important thing for kids to start getting these messages really early.
I took my son into the Boundary Waters for the first time, my wife and I, when he was 1 year old, or he turned 1 in the Boundary Waters. And it was just a really fun experience. Wow. He really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Wow. That's great.
To add on to that, I took my pregnancy test in the Boundary Waters and found out I was pregnant there. It was just, I just had a feeling, so I brought it with just in case. And even the woods, TMI. And sure enough, I was pregnant with my son, and then he came back a few months later after he was born, and got to stay at Voyager Canoe Outfitters while we did some day canoe trips with him.
Yeah, our daughter took first steps above Bass Lake outside of Ely when she was about 1 year old.
Wonderful. Yeah, so many great young connections. The younger you can get them in, the better, I think. Well, yeah, thanks again to everyone for joining. If anyone has questions, please feel free to reach out and email me, and I can connect you with any of the authors individually. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great afternoon.